see.
And I might just switch to like a blur because I'm getting that like weird sort of, yeah, there's that.
Okay.
There we are. That might work better.
All right. I am showing up. Let's see. I'm not showing up on YouTube yet, I don't think. So I'm gonna, should be. We did test this and it worked. Ah, yes, it's live. Okay, I don't know when I went live in there, but hello, everyone. We're live, and we are here for the Professional Development Homeschooling Parent Book Club. And today I am joined by Jason D. Dehart, author of Building Critical Literacy and Empathy with Graphic Novels. And we're going to give everybody a few minutes just to kind of hop on. But this was the book selection for March. We usually do it at the end of the month. But this last week, my oldest was in his first ever theater production, which was really exciting, as
Nice.
he is not like my middle. Yeah, my middle was in Frozen Junior earlier this year. He was Olaf, but my oldest is not like being in front of people so much. So it was a big leap for him, but he really enjoyed it. He was in an old Western melodrama. So we had a lot of fun, and my other kids got to go and throw popcorn at the villain and boo the villains and cheer the heroes. And it was so much fun. So that's why we didn't meet last week, but we are here this week. And we will take some time to learn a little bit more about graphic novels and about Jason, you here. We'll hear a little bit about you as well. And we will have time for questions. Of course, any questions that you have throughout the chat, feel free to pop them in. This is a new setup for me, so it might take me a little bit of tech and a little bit of figuring, but we will pull those questions in. And if you're watching the replay, definitely feel free to put questions in as well and continue the conversation, even if you can't make it live. And for those of you who are wondering if you could join, even if you haven't finished the book yet, absolutely, we would love to have you. So I think, I'm trying to think what one of the things I wanted to discuss here for those of you who are new, because I know we have a lot of new people. And again, the setup is new, so I expect it to take some getting used to as well. We're on our new channel, so there might be some people on the old channel who try to pop over a little bit as well. So I'm going to just talk for a few more minutes to give people that opportunity. But for those of you new, the Professional Development Book Club for homeschooling families every year, starting this year, this is our first year, but we will be putting out a list of books for you to vote on. And we have a meeting every other month. And then the month in between, I like to try to give you a little extra resources about what we discussed the month before to help you on your homeschooling journey, because teachers, as you know, definitely do professional development books like this throughout the year. As teachers continue to work in school, we're always learning more ourselves, and it's a great thing to do if you're homeschooling your kids as well. There's always new things to learn. And I don't know, have you been doing any of your own professional development lately?
I have indeed. I was going to say the school where I am currently teaching, I'm currently in the K-12 setting. And so we just finished today, actually, a book club around the growth mindset coach book is what we did. My principal is a wonderful leader, and she leads us through book clubs that have been meaningful to her previous locations where she served. And she also takes solicitations from the faculty and staff as well. So it's always a thing. I've been a teacher for 18 years, and I wish that there was a point at which you could say, I've learned it all, I've done it all. But I continue to grow, and I'm closing in on this year. I think this is 18, if my word problem math is correct. And so there's just always something more to learn, which is both humbling, but it's pretty exciting as a teacher to say, hey, I haven't rounded the corner on everything just yet. I still have some processing that I can do. I still have a new way of going through this. So that's also part of the reason why I love teaching as much as I do.
Yeah, there's always new. I feel like every time, like I do a lot of tutoring still. I'm not in the traditional school setting because I'm teaching my own kids, but I still do tutoring here and there. And I feel like every student just brings something new, and it keeps it alive, and it's fun. I mean, that's part of what's so fun about teaching and education and learning. We're always learning, never ever stop learning, right? Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
always
And as
learning.
the teacher, you are the lead learner. You're the person who's modeling that learning process, and
Yep.
it's okay not to know answers and to model the process of finding those answers. I learned that early in my career, and very much a proponent of preparing in the best way possible, but also recognizing those times when going and finding additional answers is sometimes a really good modeling process, especially this world that we live in of all kinds of information being thrown at us all the time.
Yes, for sure. Um, I wanted you, if you don't mind, to take a little time just to, you've been telling us a little bit about yourself and where you work and what you're doing. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about yourself and kind of what brought you to this world of graphic novels and comics?
Absolutely. So, graphic novels, comics were something that I connected with as a very young reader. I can remember being, I think I was in first grade or second grade, and getting sick and staying in a hospital for a while. And my parents bought me a stack of comics. That by no means was my first literacy experience. I'd been read to and read along with as a child, but that was one of those moments that I connected with reading, and comics were something that I continued to enjoy throughout my youth. I didn't connect with school as much as a student always, but I was a pretty good student. I tried to be a teacher pleaser. That's what I aimed for, at least in most cases. And comics then came back a little bit later when I started my teaching career, because I think they were part of popular culture. I think they were something that I was able to connect with my students on at the time. I started as a middle school teacher in 2007 and connected comics that way, starting really in my second year. My students started bringing novelizations of Marvel films that were becoming popular around that time. They started doing that my first year teaching, but I wasn't really comfortable accessing comics and using them in the classroom at that point, because I too had questions about the best way to go about using comics, the best way to use popular culture text. And so that was something that I developed over the years as I was a middle school teacher. And then I had the opportunity to do a PhD program at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville with Dr. Sturge Butzakis. And if you look up his work, if you know anything about him, you know that he's looked at graphic novels and comics and popular forms of text with adolescents and adults. His dissertation was about adults who felt that comics were this huge point in their reading lives. And so I became open to the idea of seeing comics in a new way at that point. And subsequently was a professor for a few years, arguably, if one is once a professor, always a professor, maybe still professing to profess. But currently in the high school classroom and continuing to practice with graphic novels and comics among many other types of texts. That's one message that I would clearly send to listeners, is that this is about comics, but really what it's about is connecting your child, a student in your class, to a particular kind of book. And that might be comics, it might be romance, it might be adventure, it might be some other kind of storytelling. But this behavior we engage in of literacy is a really complex and a cool process, if I can use a very academic word. Is very cool, of becoming critical thinkers and close readers. So it's really about connecting students to reading, and comics might be the thing. It might be some other text or text adjacent medium that you discover, but enlivening, enriching students with that ability to see themselves as authors and to engage with some sort of print or text-based page is just magic. It's a magical work that we do.
So, what would you say? So, when I was working in the library, the local library, it was an interesting time because um, this was fairly recently, the last few years, but we were starting to get a lot more interest in graphic novels. And it was interesting to see the librarians on staff because we were trying to figure out, kids would come in and just want graphic novels, nothing. They weren't interested in anything else, which, there was a divide in the the staff, some said, no, we have to make sure that the graphic novels are mixed in with the real books so that they get real books too. And some of the newer librarians and those of us geared more towards kids were more like, no, we have to have a section so that it's easy for them to find what they're looking for of graphic novels, so that they can, so just like with anybody else, so that they can find what they want. And so it was a discussion for a while, and we ended up putting them right at the beginning of the middle grade section, like right when you walk in there, right there. And those books, I mean, there is not a place, I think, in the library that got so messy, which was excellent, because that means that kids are pulling through, looking through, going through the graphic novels and engaging in. And there would be parents that said, I haven't been able to get my kids to read, but now they're reading. Like, this is good. But then there were others who were concerned, like, how do I, what do I do from here? How do I get them to read regular books? And I think that's a big question that we have. And, how do you speak to when you hear parents that say, how do I get my kids to read regular books, or who think less of graphic novels? What do you say to them? And then also, with this perspective of homeschooling families, their question is, okay, so I see you read something like, I'm surrounded by graphic novels right now, but like, let's say we take this one, The Giver, which is an adaptation, a graphic novel adaptation of a great classic. How would this be used in an academic setting versus just seeing it as something for fun?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, first I would say if your kids are reading graphic novels, that is indeed reading. Reading is this process of decoding what's on the page. There are words that are part of the graphic novel experience. There are visuals and images that add some appeal, but they also add, in addition to the fun and the appeal, they add some really qualitative, really general aspects of interesting interpretation that can happen. And that can happen at the word level, interpretation can happen at the image level. There might be something in the design. They're pretty sophisticated works. And if you think about the kind of reading that we do in the world today, in digital and hybrid places, most of the interpretation, most of that process of becoming literate people really involves not only unpacking a word, but unpacking the symbols, gestures, meaning that are associated with that word, those design features. So there's a lot more to reading than just unpacking the word, but it certainly begins there. So I would never skip over the written word. The other part that you mentioned there is the idea of like a real book. And I've had children talk about graphic novels in this way too. I've had students talk about them as, well, it's not a real book. And it's sort of the Pinocchio question: when does a book become a real book? Does one have to have so many words or a certain word count in order for a book to become a real book? And to that end, are picture books real books? They're certainly called picture books. So there's that idea of, when does a text become legitimate? When does it become a way of thinking about the written word and what it can communicate? And if you're looking at text from the idea of, this is something that communicates, this is something that carries an idea, using words, maybe additional features, but word centered. I think comics fit that bill pretty well. So if you're having children engage with graphic novels, I would indeed say that they are reading books, and I would even go as far as to say they are reading real books. And you can do things with graphic novels. You can ask questions and have conversations that you can't have with word only books or prose books, like the presentation of characters, like the decision to include certain elements in a panel or to leave certain aspects out. So when you held up The Giver there, that's a great example of both a book that I've taught in traditional prose form. Lois Lowry's book is wonderful and amazing, and I would by no means sacrifice it and say only read the graphic novel. But at the same time, P. Craig Russell did a really interesting job of capturing those images and thinking about the things that happen to infants in The Giver. it hits a little differently on the graphic novel page. And so there are questions of, power relationships, the way that people are positioned, sort of in the way that we might look at film and other forms of media that we can ask with graphic novels that we can't ask with a traditional prose text. So I would say you can do really interesting work with the comic, not in substitution of a prose book, because I'm actually very traditional. I think you should read a wide variety, but
Mhm.
in addition to, adjacent to, at times instead of, but also alongside other forms of reading, I honestly think that's the only way we become literate and thoughtful people and citizens, is to engage with text and ideas pretty openly. uh, so I hope that answers your question. I hope
No,
that
it
does
does. It's
answer it
great. And my
somehow.
brain is like fireworking off too off of that. One of the things that I like to do with some of these remakes, like The Giver, or I have like Shakespeare, the graphic Shakespeare here. This one is amazing. And so, for so many kids, one of the things that I like to do, especially if in a homeschool setting you're working with an age range, or even if you have similar ages with very, very different abilities, if you have a kid who's very visual, regardless of their reading capability, sometimes I will like to pair a graphic novel with a read aloud or with an audio version so that the kids can go right along with the story and follow it along, especially if you have a younger child who you want to include in some way and it's an appropriate one, which some of these are definitely for older kids, but there's plenty that the graphic novel would be fine and the read along for the younger child to also become more a part of the story and what's going on. I find that that's a really great way to incorporate family as well. And I was going to say one thing, you were talking about when does a book become a book versus a graphic novel? And I wanted to show a quick example of this and kind of get your feedback on this as well. This is Sydney and Taylor. This is an early chapter book series that is beloved in our household and by others. And if you look at this, it's got a lot of pictures, but I don't think anybody would call this a graphic novel. They would call it an illustrated text, illustrated, picture. This is not graphic novel style. But if you look at this and compare it to another one for a similar age group, that is Fox and Rabbit, this is graphic novel style, but the difficulty is similar. There's still lots of pages, but you've got these panels, which I think we're going to jump into a little bit more here in a minute, but that help tell the story in a different way. But I wouldn't say that this book is any less of a book than this one. I don't know. That just, they're so similar. It's just different ways of storytelling. And when you think about it that way, I think it just kind of opens the mind a little. And one thing I always like to say, and I definitely want your take on this, if you look at a traditional graphic novel, especially one that's not necessarily a remake, but the vocabulary level in a graphic novel can actually be higher because they have the illustrations supporting the picture. So for that same age level, they might not use the same vocabulary in a text that's purely prose because it might be too challenging. But when they've got that picture support, they can go a little more challenging on the vocabulary in graphic novels. So have you found that to be true?
Yeah, especially if you're thinking about the origins of particular characters, the kind of graphic novel that you're using. I grew up reading graphic novels and comics that were well beyond what I would have probably been encountering in what was published for children my age at that point. I was reading DC and Marvel books. And a lot of the origins of characters tie in a lot with science. There are historical elements. If you think about Captain America, this was favorite character day, by the way, at my school, and so I
Awesome.
got to dress as like in a Captain America shirt.
So cool.
Uh, yeah, so thinking about the historical elements of that character and those ties to like historical messaging, propaganda, the kind of ideas that you can tie in, if you contrast that with an analysis of text complexity in a traditional novel, if you take like the work of Kurt Vonnegut, for example, who I'm a big fan of. I love Kurt Vonnegut. He's not read by people below about junior and high school. But if you translate just from like a word level, word repetition, word length kind of analysis of his work. There were some studies done in around 2010, especially when the standards were changing then with Common Core, that looked at his books and said, well, this is actually on about the fourth grade reading level or fifth grade reading level. Similarly, if you look at newspapers, they're written in that sort of accessible format versus something that's a little more complex, like a graphic novel, where you have to think about both the words, where you have really particular vocabulary. One person that I've talked with that makes comics talks about them as illustrated dialogue. So, like in poetry, when we choose our words very carefully, if you're reading a writer of a comic or graphic novel that's really doing their job and thinking deeply about what they're doing, they're giving you a lot of really interesting language, but there are also really interesting images that come along with that. So you might have fewer words, but they might be lower frequency words. They might be words that are more challenging, multisyllabic words. They might be words related to a particular topic. They might be in science comics from first second. They might be related to a scientific concept or historical concept. If someone is writing a autobiographical graphic novel about their lives, there might be words that are particular to a certain time period, or even ways of speaking that are particular to a time period, as in Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, where you have this sort of prose description that comes alongside dialogue. So, not all comics are created equally, and comics are really a medium. Graphic novel is a word that applies to comics, and it's not necessarily a particular type of story, but it's a particular type of storytelling. And so you can make a lot of really creative and interesting decisions based on the needs of your students, based on the needs of your children, with graphic novels, in addition to a range of other texts as well.
Hearing you talk made me think, just making a connection to the homeschooling world. I don't know if you're familiar with Charlotte Mason, if you've heard of any of her education philosophies at all. She's very popular in the homeschooling world and focused a lot on
Mhm.
reading living books, learning through narrative story, learning through very interesting, high vocabulary kind of books. But she also focuses a lot on the arts and picture study and learning how to really study a picture and really get the most out of it. And I think this is the first time in my mind I'm making that connection there. For those of you who are listening to this or live or later that are very staunch Charlotte Mason homeschoolers, the graphic novels and comic books are a really great way to kind of marry those two aspects of Charlotte Mason, because you can dive very deep into the study of picture and graphics to tell a story, as well as having the words to go alongside it. You can even use your graphic novels for your copy work, where you take passages and pull out. Sometimes the grammar is going to be slightly different. The way that the words are used is going to be slightly different in a comic book, but that's also a great thing to talk about, especially in our world of visual media, because the way that we use words all around us is going to be different than the way that you see them in a book. So it can really open the door for that. And I just wanted to say, before we jump into something really exciting, we're going to take some time looking at When Stars Are Scattered and kind of show a little bit about how to pull out a lesson from that. But before we do that, one thing that I really noticed about your book that is so different from any of the other graphic novel books that I've read and study that I've done is your focus on empathy and diversity, and using these books as a way to connect to kids in kind of a deeper level. And I'm just curious about when that connection happened for you, and why you feel graphic novels are so good for getting that perspective from somebody else's view.
Yeah, yeah. I was reminded of this again this morning, just looking at stories in popular media and stories that people share and the things that we can access through reading. And one of the quotes that stood out to me for years about reading is this idea that we read to know we're not alone. I think that was William Nicholson writing Shadowlands, the story of C.S. Lewis. We read and we write to communicate ideas, and this idea of a book connecting with people over time, someone processing a really difficult experience or something that not everyone might necessarily understand, but sharing it in a book that then can be kind of this nexus point for other people through time, across space to understand it is a pretty miraculous thing that we get to engage with as readers and writers. So that was a big inspiration for sharing that particular focus in the book. And I have also had the chance of working with graduate students and undergraduate students looking at books and thinking about ways to build connections with readers. And When Stars Are Scattered is just an amazing text for linking with readers in that way. Thinking about a group that I had online during the pandemic in the fall of 2020, and the way that we were able to think about comprehension strategies, vocabulary strategies, without something feeling like a worksheet, without something feeling like rote and repetition, but something that's more organic to a book. So those were all of the ingredients, or at least many of the ingredients of thinking about comics in that way, and reflecting on my own story of encountering popular characters who had agency. I think that a lot of children in the world focus and face situations that would be challenging to us as adults, and books are this wonderful way for equipping, enabling people, children, to process experiences, to think about who they want to be and the kind of world that they want to create. And graphic novels are really unique for that because they have not only the description in words, but they also have the pictures that we can relate to.
I think there's something about seeing someone's face, whether it's a character, whether it's a human, actually seeing the emotion on their face that comes through in a graphic novel in a way that you can't do in with prose or even novel and verse. I think that that can be really powerful. And I think sometimes when you have an image that goes with a story, it just makes it feel more real. I don't know. Maybe that's just me because I'm a very visual person. And so seeing it on the page for me really helps me feel more deeply, I would say, for the characters in some cases. And so I think that can be powerful. But for some reason, I had never considered that as being, something really strong that comes through with graphic novels. And I really appreciated that and the diversity that you showed of books in your book. For those of you who haven't read it yet or are still through, if you want ideas for graphic novels for your school, for your classroom, for your kids, this is chock full. I was going to go to the library and pull so many of the ones that you recommended, but today was not a day that I was able to do that. So I was sad, but I do have a lot still here that you recommended from my own shelf. So if any of you want to see inside any of these, let me know. I can do a video later. I do have some here that I can show you. In fact, you had mentioned Cardboard Kingdom. I asked my kids before I came back here, okay, guys, I need you to pull your favorite graphic novels and bring them to me. Oh, they were so excited about this assignment. And one of my kids was like, I can't find the first Cardboard Kingdoms. You have to put Cardboard Kingdoms out. So we
Nice.
didn't find it, but it's somewhere. But he was also really excited. So my middle child was a very, very late reader. He has pretty severe dyslexia. And for him, graphic novels, but he's got a reader mind. Like now that he's reading well, he reads all the time. He writes all the time. He's very much that kid who can't get enough. But he said, Mom, while you're on there, you have to show them these two. So I promised him I would. So I'm going to do that.
Right,
And then I'm going
right.
to hand the
Please
floor
do.
to you. But he loves the Warriors Cat series.
Mhm.
He reads the regular books, he listens to the audiobooks, and he also loves to do the graphic novels as well. These are just fairly recently started coming out. And the great thing is that his little sister, he's almost 12, he'll be 12 this month, and his little sister is 7. And he will sit on the couch and read to her from the Warriors book, and she will follow along in the graphic novel. And they have a great time together. And so he wanted me to share that. And he also said, but mom, when you read graphic novels, you can put other graphic novels with them. So
Absolutely.
he likes to read these two together. So he'll read the science comic graphic novels, which again is a great way for him. He loves to read these to my 7-year-old, and they talk about all these neat cat facts and all the things they're learning, and they try things on our cat to see if it's really true. And it's just a really great way for them to, even though there's a sizable age difference there, to kind of bond together over books and get really excited. And I think that having all the images opens that up in a way that my littlest wouldn't have the attention span to just listen to him read a book. But because she's got the pictures to go along with it, she really gets into the story with him. And I think that that's so fun. Such a fun way to go about it. But anyway, I promised him I would share that. So I did that real quick. And for this part, if you have When Stars Are Scattered, you can open up your copy, follow along. I'm actually just going to hand the screen over to you to show us a little bit about how to get the most out of using a graphic novel in an academic setting.
Absolutely. And
All right. Well,
I'll be using just a demo page here, so hopefully not violating any copyright or any of that sort of thing.
oops, wrong
But
person. Wait. No.
that's okay.
I've got to figure out, how do I hide me? Nope. There we go. Got it. Yay.
All right. I think I can. I think I can. Let's see. Let me make sure that I'm sharing the right screen here. This is not something I typically do on StreamYard. So, yes, okay, I think that works. All right, so this is actually an example, and you can pull in any particular page of What Stars Are Scattered or any graphic novel, and you'll notice that I'm highlighting the idea of close reading. So this is actually something that I just did recently with students in my high school class, but there are certain questions, there are certain things that you can access with a range of readers. So this is from a graphic novel called Family Style by Ten Fam. I'm always adding to my graphic novel catalog. You'll notice that from the book and the number of people that I attempt to include in that experience. But since the book has been published last year, there are a range of additional graphic novel possibilities. So I would just say keep up with the things that are being published, make really good friends with the librarian. So the first thing that I'm going to do before I dive into anything on this page is I'm going to look at the presentation of the page. This is something that is very often overlooked by readers. It's something that is sort of ingrained naturally as you're going through the process of reading comics, but the page turn is powerful. It is a powerful tool for comics creators in the visual medium. So what I'm seeing here are 6 panels. The arrangement of the panels might be a particular format, a particular purpose. And so before I ask anything related to what's within a panel, I'm going to ask a reader, a student, a child to notice the number of panels and the way that they're spread out. Now, I'm noticing this is pretty evenly spread. I'm noticing there's no overlap. Sometimes panels, those little narrative boxes, overlap or they work in different ways. But like reading a screen, I'm going to now pay attention to what's within each of these as though they are their own individual sort of filmic frame. So in the first one, what perspective do we have there? What point of view are we looking from? Looks like kind of a first person. Looks like maybe I am the character that is engaged in this process. And then in the next panel, before I attend to the words, I can attend to the words along the path as I go. But in the next panel, I'm going to move laterally to the right. I am now noticing that, oh, suddenly I'm like a third person. I am not this person anymore. I'm outside of this person. I can see some other characters in the background. I can see this person leaning over. So all of the things that I'm doing right now are wonderful to practice with sharing a screen, sharing a book with someone who's sitting close to you, and just talking through the things that you're thinking about. Now I'm going to sort of move diagonally down to the place where I'm being offered a plate. And it seems as though I am now first person again. Now I'm the person receiving this plate from this other character. And so I'll then move laterally to see, okay, now I'm third person again. I'm outside of the perspective, but it looks like I am that younger character. And now when I move laterally down, I'm exterior, the younger character, and further back, I'm exterior, the younger character. So I'm thinking, based on my reading of this, I would be asking a question along these lines of, who do you think the main character is based on this interaction? Is it one of those two kids that's running in the background? Is it this older, more maternal character that's offering the food? Is it the person that is pictured in the final three panels? And I'm almost thinking, based on just the page real estate, the page that's taken up, I'm probably that character that's featured in those last three panels. That person is featured prominently. They're probably the main character. So now I can go back and I can actually look at some of the elements that are parts of the word. I can do that as I go. I can do that as I return. That's really my prerogative as the reader with a graphic novel. I get to decide the order that I want to experience these pieces and parts of the page in. And as I'm turning the pages, I get to encounter each new page in a slightly new way. And I get to have an experience and think about how the previous page tied to the next one. And there are lots of interesting imagery things that you can do with the page, as well as inference and prediction with the things that happen in graphic novels. So now I'm seeing that there are these ingredients that are being listed. I'm seeing more ingredients being listed. These are in these small boxes. So I'm drawing attention to every place on the page, every place on the screen that I can to closely read. Those boxes don't have any connecting features to any person speaking, so I can sort of tell this is their narrator. As when in prose, a character is talking to me, but I don't see quotation marks. That little box is a grammatical feature on the page that allows me to think, okay, now I'm looking at what a person is telling me. And I would be saying to a child, to a reader, what does it seem like is really important? When an author makes a decision about what's on a page, if it's visual, if it's word-based or verbal, they're making decisions about priorities, things that are important to them. These ingredients are really important to them. In fact, those ingredients then carry over to the dialogue that I can now see is attributed to this maternal figure. The wordless panel on the page is really intentionally designed because it's the act of eating. It's the act of consuming something and reflecting on all of those ingredients. And now I'm thinking, why was this so important? Is this just a foodie? Is this a food critic? Is this a person that just really enjoys food? And then I see the character say something that's an anchor point on the page. It's what we might call a theme statement. It tastes like home.
Mm.
And that leads me to the next part, and that leads me to the idea, the overall question of what's happening in this page. So, whatever page of whatever particular graphic novel you're looking at, one of the critiques that sometimes artists and authors make is that they'll share a graphic novel, it will be marketed, released, it takes them years to create it, and then readers are responding to them the same day and saying, "I just read this afternoon. When's the next one?" There's a lot of sense making to enjoy on that page. There's a lot of detail to absorb. And so, just the process of looking through and taking apart the page is part of what you might do. Now, this is an
Mm.
example of Stuck Rubber Baby by Howard Cruz. So, not one for the young kids, not one, but certainly one that ties to the civil rights movement. And I always like to show images like this when readers say, hey, aren't these just for younger kids? Remember that comics are a medium. It's a way of telling a story, so it can be for any age. And then the wordless panel, the wordless page. This is great for working across languages, but it's also great for the ability to generate vocabulary. We know that in vocabulary development, in literacy, a lot of what is spoken, uttered, is preceding that which is written. Writing is a really complex process that takes some time, but speaking is something that comes a little more naturally. So imagine the conversation you can build around a page like this of what characters are feeling, what they're encountering and going through. I believe this particular page is from a writer that I really like named Ben Sears. So I hope I'm not misattributing that, but there are so many options out there for exploring a page. And I would add sticky notes to a page like this. I would have students writing. I would have students responding. One of the things that was very true for me as a young reader is I moved quickly. Uh, I would say same day from reading and loving comics to wanting to create them myself. So it's great for building that writer identity as well as the reader identity. So,
And can I add one thing
mhm.
too? For those of you with students who struggle with speech and are working with speech issues, I know a lot of you homeschool for special needs children. This can be a really great tool to work on that speech with those children, even just from early levels, labeling the things to just trying to get them to use their words to communicate what's happening on the page verbally. This can be a really big help.
Absolutely. Students with any form of diverse communication ability, if that's something that impairs writing, if that's something that sort of impairs the physical motion, the uh, fine dexterity of writing, sometimes engaging with a page that has pictures on it can open up some language that maybe a child didn't know that they could access. And sometimes, if a child just doesn't have quite the words for what they're experiencing or what they're thinking about, an image might carry that across and help communicate. So, uh, lots of interesting and cool things that can be done with literacy in the arts. Shall I stop my share there? Is there any follow up or anything else that you'd like me to say or to explore?
Let's see. I have lots of stuff because again, I wasn't sure how many people would be able to join us live. So I thought, well, we might have a lot of questions, so we might not have any. But people do watch. Just it's hard with kids to find a time that's good for everybody. So that's why we
Absolutely.
record these, and we're so glad to have you here. I have so many things marked in here. One of the things that I have in your book that I wanted to call to attention to here. Yeah, let me go ahead and pull this. There we go. Pull that down. I think you have a lot of these boxes in your book
Hmm.
where you give very, very specific questions, kind of like walking you through. So if someone didn't feel familiar with comics or graphic novels and wanted to use them with their students, these questions are just great for really anything. Talking about your assumptions about the medium. This one's reflections on the application, but then you have other ones that are more specific to working with kids. One of the questions I had reading them, though, is I really loved your bridge that you were just talking about, taking this to writing beyond just reading, but in literacy as well, taking it to writing, because writing is a struggle for so many people. And I know that you used a lot of illustration involved in that. Do you ever have, for you, students who push back on that drawing aspect, who maybe don't feel comfortable with that part of it? And how do you help them to kind of overcome that to really get their brains going?
Yeah, absolutely. So Linda Berry's a great vocal advocate for art, looking a variety of different ways. At some point, we stop just trying art and we start apologizing for it beforehand. As a quick thought experiment or just a social experiment, the next time you ask someone to draw something for you, if you're in an occasion to do that, just stop and notice, do they apologize for what they're about to draw before they even start? It's sort of like singing. Now, I'm not a very good singer, but sometimes I sing in the shower. But so that's totally a way of just saying we're gonna have fun with this. We're gonna dig into it. It doesn't have to look like any particular thing. That's a great place for multiple graphic novels and comics to be used as examples, from very complex like Howard Cruz to something more along the lines of like a Bean and Nugget uh, comic. So comics can look a lot of different ways, from simple images all the way to something that takes hours to produce. I would also say that if you have a child who doesn't want to draw, they just want to write, that's also totally fine. Uh, Writing is its own very complex form of illustration and pictorial representation. We arrange letters, which are these strange little symbols that we group together, block together, and then share with one another. And then we put sounds with them and we communicate. It's really pretty cool when you think about it. So if you have a child who says, I don't really want to draw, I would just like to write, please. That's totally fine. Absolutely. I've had students say that in classes, and I almost secretly sort of go, yes, because I am after the writing aspect as well.
Mhm.
So creating that comfort, creating the invitation to make art is a wonderful process. Creating a comfortable environment for learners in general, as Stephen Krashen would tell us with the affective domain. It's something that we want students to engage in. We want students to feel comfortable. We want our children to feel comfortable exploring and asking questions. But there's also something very, very cool about recognizing an affinity for art, an affinity for writing, and honoring both of those as well.
Um, Another thing I wanted to bring up, since we have time and there's not people asking questions, based on questions I get a lot, and I think you are uniquely posed to answer this question well. Graphic novels, especially in older ages, as we start looking at upper middle grade, high school, there's a lot more people in the homeschool space working with kids these ages, especially since COVID-19 happened. There's a lot more of that going on. And
Mhm.
there's not as many resources for families with kids those ages in the homeschooling world. And I wonder if you have anything to say as far as maybe some recommendations for graphic novels for those ages, as well as ways that maybe they can jump a little bit deeper to challenge kids at that level with comics and graphic novels.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a range of comics and graphic novels that have been created for older readers. I would suggest looking at some publishers like Fantagraphics, First Second. Both of those are noted publishers who cater to younger children in the case of First Second, but also older readers. So there are a wide range of books that are available to think about for quite a great span. A lot of DC and Marvel comics, you have to have a particular like bent toward a superhero book, which is not always necessarily the thing that kids are interested in, but those actually are written and composed for older readers. Some of the content is pretty mature in some of those books. That's a side note, a caveat to be sure that you look at the books as well in manga or in any form, just to make sure that it's what you're looking for, age appropriate
Mhm.
wise, age appropriateness. That's a lot
Yes.
of suffixes. So those would be great places to look. Book Riot is a website that includes recommendations for older readers. And I would also suggest, I have a couple of friends, colleagues, people in the world of writing and creating books about comics. Tim Smythe is one of those. I've talked with him on an episode of my podcast. He's an educator. He teaches history and literacy through comics, and he actually creates teacher guides to go with graphic novels. So,
I
yeah,
will
if you,
put a link to that. I'll look that up and put a link below because I know lots of people are going to want that.
yeah. I would search and see if there is already a teacher guide that's been composed and created for a graphic novel that you're thinking about using, because that's a great way to engage with readers. Some of those have been made for middle school audience, but then also that line between high school and adult reading, that's something that as a parent, I want to honor that and say, those boundaries are for you to think about with your child and the things that they're experiencing and exploring. But again, with First Second, they're great books. Thinking about one of the ones that I mentioned in Building Critical Literacy and Empathy with Graphic Novels, thinking about Himawari House by Harmony Becker. Looks at language, looks at travel, from a young adult perspective of these characters who are traveling across space and thinking about identity and who they are as they're also trying to negotiate language differences. So those are a couple of resources that I would mention. Pop Culture Classroom is something that is out in the world. I'm not sure if they are updating content anymore, but that's certainly a place to go. And I mentioned a little while ago that my friend and former research advisor, Sturge Bazakis, is out in the world of researching and sharing about comics. He also has a blog called Graphic Novel Resources that people can check out. Again, you really have to look at the books, dig through them. I would look through them at a library and maybe preview some copies, because they can range anywhere from books that are great for young children to books that are really very, very mature and deal with some really intense questions in very visual ways. So,
And
lots to pick from, though, is the good news of that as well.
And that visual aspect can also take a book that might be, if you have the prose version, actually be a little lower level than the graphic novel. An example of that, I was doing some research and looking for a book list for a recent unit that I've been writing. And they've recently released a graphic novel of The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And it's the graphic novel version is very graphic. So it's great and I would recommend it, but definitely move that more to the adult, older high school level because of the graphic nature. So that's something to keep in mind when you are looking at graphic novels. While that visual can make things come alive, it can also make some of the much harder and more graphic aspects of a story come alive as well. So especially if you have sensitive learners, just be aware that that's something you're going to want to keep in mind when you look at them. So
Yeah. Now, thinking about the graphic novel and the novel Speak by Laurie Halls Anderson, which deals with sexual assault, the book itself has a way of presenting that students can process. But then the graphic novel has a very visual depiction, sort of a like jagged, broken couple of pages. There's like a spread there that's really intense. So those are things to look into and to have conversations with your children about, and to kind of sense where to go with that. Did you happen to read the Peter Cooper edition of The Jungle? I'm curious.
no, wait, maybe I'm trying to, is that the graphic novel? I
That
don't
is
remember.
one, yeah, at least one. Peter Cooper's great. His art almost looks like
Let me see.
woodcutting, and you can do
I
some really
think
interesting mood and tone work.
that sounds about right. I'm so bad with authors. I'm getting better, but I've never been good. I'm looking it up right now so that I can see Peter Cooper, The Jungle. It was amazing. The artwork was really good. I don't think so. See.
He also has a graphic novel adaptation of Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis.
Oh,
So
wow.
again, yeah, mood and tone, the way that he constructs art, and that's a whole other conversation. Is that I don't think there's any literacy standard that you can't access in some way with a graphic novel to talk
Right.
about the presentation on the page. So, and if you find one, let me know and I'll creatively troubleshoot it with you. I'll be glad to do that.
This was Christina Gershom or
Oh, okay.
Gurman. It's a pretty new one. Yeah, I had them order at my library, which if you guys don't know, at your local library with graphic novels or any other book, if there are books that you want, especially if they're newer, but in general, if they're books that you want that the library doesn't carry, don't feel like, oh, my library doesn't have it. You can request it. And
Hmm.
libraries love that because they want to get books on their shelves that people want to read. And when they don't have requests, they're guessing. They're trying to do their best to figure out what the patrons want. So if you let them know, and especially if they see an uptick in people wanting graphic novels in their library, they'll be sure to provide more. So be sure to utilize your library. They like that. It's not going to,
Absolutely.
I used to be, before I worked in the library, I used to be afraid. I was like, I don't want to request things. I feel so, but what if they have a budget to spend on books and they want to spend them on books that people want? So be sure to let them know what you want. And if it's not a book
Absolutely.
that they can add to their collection for some reason, maybe their collection policy only allows books that were published a certain amount back or whatever, they can still get it from interlibrary loan. So be sure to ask about that.
Absolutely. I was a librarian for a few years as a college student. That was my college job. So absolutely. And I was going to mention interlibrary loans if you didn't. So yeah,
Yeah, they're great tools. And yeah, it's just, I loved working at the library. One of my favorite jobs. But another that I wanted to mention, I noticed, and this kind of goes especially with nonfiction and using graphic novels for school. I think even I in the past have, when scheduling them, struggled. Like, how do I know how to schedule for my students to read a traditional book, but how do we schedule graphic novels? And I think part of, as you saw in your breaking down of it, is that they really need time. So even though technically they could get through this book in a day, challenging them to slow down rather than speed up the reading. So making sure you give plenty of time for that thought and reflection. And it might be the first few times you go through with students, you might want to give them, if they're working independently, you might want to give them a checklist of questions to ask themselves while they're reading. If you're reading with them, you want to be sure to slow them down. And for some kids, that's going to be really hard, especially if you have really active kids or kids with ADHD. But at the same time, these students are really capable of noticing a lot of detail once they get used to it. So I think it can also help them even learn. I think it's actually easier to take some of those slower reading strategies and start with graphic novels. And then you can actually apply those easier. I think once they've got them through a medium that has pictures and more to kind of take in, I think it actually can help them learn to slow down more when reading more traditional books as well, that don't have the pictures to reflect on too, but to really start thinking about, okay, why did the author choose these words? What's here? And I think that graphic novels can be a really good jumping off point, especially for those students who really do struggle to slow down. And I think it can improve their reading overall, not just in a graphic novel, but just across the board. But I wanted to show a few nonfiction options for students. One of my favorite authors for about middle school age is Don Brown. Are you familiar with Don Brown? I think you mentioned him in your book. He
hmm,
has so many. So even just here, because one of my sons loved him, he's got The Dust Bowl, Hurricane Katrina, 9/11, Syrian refugees, the flu of 1918, and the Holocaust are ones that I just have right here. And he has so many more. This one's really, really good. But if you look at his art style too, it's kind of a loose style that
yeah,
I think, I don't know, there's something about it that really helps you think, and it gives a lot. It's not so perfect. So I think it gives students a little bit of an opportunity to have some more of their own free expression in interpreting the images as well. And he uses color and black and white in a way that really brings it alive as well. So that brings something else to the table to talk about. And like I mentioned, faces. He does a lot of faces and expressions in ways that really help tell the story. So that's one that's good, especially for, I would say, middle school to high school.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that? But really, middle school, I think, is about on track for that. But for a little bit younger, I would say this could even be middle school, middle grade. Of course, you've got your science comics, which a lot of people know about, but these are broken up into chapter, and you can really take time with these, and these can really work as a good, solid spine to teach from, as even a primary textbook if you're working from it, because these go pretty deep. If you add some additional stuff, these can really work as a primary textbook, especially for those kids, especially in science, who struggle with a lot of vocabulary, because this brings that visual aspect in to help that vocabulary really stick. So it can help the science concepts make a little bit more sense. And the same company that produces the science comics also has a history line. Well, this is not really the history one, but the history line. This is from the same line with National Park history, the Transcontinental Railroad, and it's very similar to the science comics. And so this is another nonfiction route. So especially if you have kids that struggle with nonfiction, this is a good way to kind of help get them used to that genre a little bit and introduce in a way that's a little bit more visual. Are there any other nonfiction ones that you like to go to if you're working with that genre?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. Generally, if you look up a topic, if you explore a topic and think about a particular nonfiction idea, there are going to be some that populate that are just there. Those are a couple of the big series that you mentioned. I'm trying to think if there are any additional ones. I would say the affordance of like a graphic novel memoir might be an area there as well,
Yeah.
looking at like personal story all the way back to Alison Bechtel, who created a wonderful example with Fun Home, but then more recent examples like Messy Roots from Laura Gow is a wonderful one. So sometimes that nonfiction comes through kind of the telling of personal story in that form of narrative. And then if you're looking for some really interesting use of graphic novels with like the sciences, graphic medicine can actually be a really interesting place to go. There might be some pieces to sort through because it's not necessarily aimed at a particular age group, but thinking about graphic medicine for the older reader who's read some science comics and is ready for that next step, that can be an interesting turn to take as well.
Awesome. I just looked at the time and I realized we're over a little bit here, but I wanted to thank you so much for coming on. And I believe you have a podcast yourself, correct?
I do.
Is that
Yes,
something?
I do.
Where can people find you if they want to hear more from you?
That the podcast is on YouTube, Words, Images, and Worlds. If you search my name, it should come up. It's also on Spotify and Amazon and Apple and everywhere that podcasts seem to go if I hit a button. But I'm out on the web in different places. You can find me writing things on Edutopia, Middle Web. I'm constantly in the process of trying to share ideas and really passionate about connecting theory and practice for anybody that wants to use graphic novels as well as media, specific literacy strategies, and all about that, tying together research and practice. So if you search my name, you'll be able to find me in different places. And then I also have a Facebook group for Words, Images, and Worlds that's tagged under that title as well. So I'm out there on the internet, Blue Sky, Instagram, all of those wonderful things. Threads. I'm not on Twitter, but I am in other places.
Nice. Thank you so much for coming. And just wrapping up, I want to remind you who are watching later, still leave your questions and comments below, and I will get back to you. And if I need to, or you want to, we can reach out to Jason for more questions. And our next book club is going to be at the end of, let's see, May, I believe. I will put the official time and place below, but we will be going over AI for educators and learning how to use AI and how to prepare our students for AI in the homeschool classroom, but in the classroom in general. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And I hope you join us for that. And thank you so much for joining us, Jason. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
I hope you do as well. Thanks so much for asking, and always a pleasure to share.
Thank you.